Long before the green hills of Ireland were tamed by the hands of men, the world was a crucible of shadows and ancient terrors. In the dark, mist-shrouded reaches of the northern seas, the Fomorians reigned, a race of giants born from the chaotic depths of the ocean. At the pinnacle of this grotesque hierarchy sat Balor, a king whose name was whispered with the same reverence and dread as a natural disaster. He was not merely a giant, he was a monument to old malice, standing as tall as the sea cliffs of Tory Island. But Balor was defined by one singular, terrifying feature that set him apart from all other mystical creatures of that age. High upon his brow, hidden behind 7 heavy layers of iron and leather, lay his single, lidless eye. This was no ordinary organ of sight, but a gateway to a realm of pure destruction, forged in the heat of a poisoned forge. When the eyelid of Balor was lifted, the world itself seemed to wither and turn to ash under its oppressive, burning gaze. Legend tells us that the eye was poisoned in Balor's youth, when he witnessed his father's druids brewing a concoction of pure venom. The fumes from the cauldron rose and seeped into his pupil, transforming his simple gaze into a weapon that could topple armies and crumble fortresses. From that day forward, Balor was the ultimate adversary, a creature whose very presence signaled the end of life. He ruled Tory Island with a fist of iron, his castle perched atop the jagged rocks where the waves crashed in eternal fury. The Fomorians beneath him were savage and cruel, yet even they trembled when the king's attendants moved to lift the eyelashes. Balor was a king of silence, for he knew that his power required no words, only the terrifying unveiling of his vision. However, every tyrant lives under the shadow of a prophecy, and Balor was no exception to this cosmic law. A druid had foretold that Balor would meet his end at the hands of his own grandson, a child of his blood. To prevent this, Balor locked his only daughter, Ethne, within a tower of glass, hoping to shield her from the world of men and gods. He thought he could outsmart destiny by isolating the source of his potential downfall. Yet fate is a river that always finds its path, despite the glass walls and the crashing seas. A hero from the Tuatha De Danann found his way to Ethne, and from their union, love was born. When Balor discovered the birth, he cast the infant into the sea, believing the cold waves would finish what his guards could not. He returned to his throne, confident that the evil eye would remain the unchallenged master of the horizon. Yet Lust survived, raised by the god of the sea and the spirits of the air, growing into a warrior of unmatched skill and brilliance. As the years passed, the tension between the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians reached a boiling point. The fertile lands of Ireland were being bled dry by the heavy tributes Balor demanded from those he considered inferior. The air grew heavy with the scent of impending war, a conflict that would decide the soul of the island. Balor sat upon his throne, his giant form casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the very channel to the mainland. He felt the shift in the winds. He sensed that a new power was rising, one that did not fear the dark. In his council chamber, the Fomorian generals argued for a swift and bloody invasion to crush the rebellion. Before it could bloom, Balor remained silent, his hand resting on the heavy iron lever that controlled the first layer of his ice covering. He was an adversary who did not rush into battle, for he knew that a single glance was often enough to settle any dispute. Deep within his heart, the memory of the prophecy burned like a dying ember, refusing to be extinguished by time. He wondered if the child he had cast into the waves had truly perished, or if the sea had betrayed its own kind. Meanwhile, La had arrived at the gates of Terra, claiming his place among the Tuatha De Danann as the master of all crafts. He became their champion, the sun god who would lead them against the darkness of the Fomorian king. The stage was set for the second battle of Magtord, a clash that would echo through the songs of bards for eternity. On the morning of the battle, the sky was the color of a bruised plum, and the earth groaned under the weight of 2 massive hosts. The Tuatha De Danann were radiant, their weapons shimmering with enchantments and divine light. Opposite them stood the Fomorians, a chaotic mass of limbs, tusks, and iron, led by the towering figure of Balor. Balor stood at the rear of his army, his massive frame supported by a specialized carriage designed to hold his weight and his eye. He watched through his one good, normal eye as the front lines collided in a symphony of steel and screams. The mystical creatures of the deep fought alongside the Fomorians, dragging warriors down into the blood-soaked mud. But lo was a whirlwind on the battlefield, his spear casting beams of light that blinded the Fomorian ranks. Seeing his army falter, Balor knew the moment had come to unleash the terror he had carried for centuries. He signaled to his servants for massive men whose only job was to lift the lid of the evil eye. "Lift it," Balor commanded, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. The servants strained against the rusted iron hooks, slowly peeling back the first layer of leather and lead. As the first layer fell, a wave of cold dread washed over the Tuatha De Danann, chilling their hearts. The second and third layers were removed, and the grass beneath Balor's carriage began to turn black and brittle. By the 5th layer, the air began to shimmer with a distorted heat, and the birds in the sky fell dead from the toxic aura. The Tuatha De Danann warriors began to retreat, their shields cracking under the invisible pressure of the coming gaze. Nuada, the king of the gods, looked on in horror as his bravest soldiers withered before the eye was even fully revealed. "Hold your ground," La shouted, his voice ringing out above the chaos like a silver bell. He knew that the evil eye was a weapon of absolute destruction, but he also knew it was his grandfather's greatest weakness. The sixth layer was cast aside, and a low, humming sound filled the valley, the sound of reality being torn apart. Balor's face was a mask of grim determination. He would burn this island to the bedrock if it meant his survival. He looked toward the golden warrior in the distance, sensing the familiar bloodline that had haunted his dreams. The seventh and final layer was about to be lifted, the thin veil that kept the poison from devouring everything in sight. La gripped his sling, a simple weapon compared to the cosmic power of the giant. But he had prepared for this moment. He had a stone of special craftsmanship, forged in the fires of the gods and cooled in the waters of wisdom. As the final lid was raised, a beam of sickly, green-black light erupted from Balor's brow. Anything it touched, man, beast, or stone, disintegrated into a fine, gray ash instantly. The ground split open, and the very sky seemed to bleed as the poison gaze raked across the battlefield. Hundreds of warriors fell in an instant, their screams silenced before they could even leave their throats. Balor turned his head slowly, seeking La, intent on erasing the prophecy from existence with a single look. But La was not standing still. He moved with the speed of a lightning bolt, weaving through the destruction. He swung his sling with a rhythm that defied the laws of physics, gathering the momentum of the sun itself. Just as Balor's eye fixed upon him, La released the stone with a cry of defiance that shook the heavens. The projectile flew true, a streak of light cutting through the oppressive darkness of the evil eye's beam. It struck the center of Balor's eye with the force of a falling star, driving the organ back through the giant's skull. The impact was so great that the eye burst through the back of Balor's head, its gaze now facing his own Fomorian army. In his final moments of agony, Balor's eye remained open, and the beam of destruction swept across his own people. The Fomorians, who had worshipped him as a god of terror, were incinerated by the very power they had relied upon. Balor let out a roar that could be heard in the deepest trenches of the ocean, a sound of profound loss and shattered pride. His massive body began to collapse, a mountain of flesh and iron falling toward the earth. As he fell, the ground shook with such violence that the coastline of Ireland was permanently reshaped. The light from his eye flickered and died, leaving only a smoldering crater where the king had stood. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackling of the burning earth and the distant moans of the survivors. La stood over the fallen giant, his face a mixture of triumph and solemn reflection. He had defeated the ultimate adversary, not through brute force alone, but through the precision of his will. The mystical creatures that had served Balor fled back into the sea, their master's reign of terror finally at an end. The Tuatha De Danann gathered around their champion, realizing that the age of shadows had passed. Yet, the memory of Balor's gaze would remain a scar on the collective memory of the land. They buried the giant beneath the rocks, but some say that on stormy nights, the ground still feels warm near his grave. The story of Balor is more than just a tale of a monster. It is a meditation on the nature of power and its inevitable corruption. He was a being who possessed the ultimate vision, yet he was blind to the love of his family and the needs of his people. His eye, which could see through the heart of mountains, could not see the simple truth of the prophecy's justice. In the end, his greatest weapon became his own executioner, a poetic symmetry that the universe often demands. The Fomorians were driven back to the dark corners of the world, becoming the monsters of folklore rather than the rulers of men. La ascended to the throne, ushering in a golden age for Ireland, where light and craft were celebrated over fear. But the legend of the evil eye persists, a warning to all who would seek to rule through intimidation and destruction. It reminds us that no matter how heavy the iron shields we build around our hearts, truth will find a way through. Even the most mystical of creatures is subject to the balance of the world, where every shadow must eventually meet the dawn. Balor's gaze was a fire that consumed itself, leaving behind only the lessons of history. To look upon the world with hate is to eventually be blinded by that very same darkness. As the mist rolled in over Tory Island, one can almost see the outline of a giant waiting for the layers to be lifted once more. But the sun always rises, and the heroes of the light are always ready to cast their stones. And so, the legend of Balor rests, etched into the stone and soil of the ancient world. Thank you for journeying through the mist of time with us to witness the fall of the evil eye. For more legends of heroes and ancient adversaries, don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio.